Hi, and welcome to week 6 of the Publicity Workshop. Taking a moment to check in. I hope you had a great week and you are really starting to connect to the different aspects of publicity and having a public voice. I wanted to give you a little heads up. Next week we'll have a recorded interview with Michelle Richards, who is the Director of Public Relations and Special Events for Waterford at the Fisker brands. Fisker owns Waterford amongst many other brands. She has done this for a number of years, and the scope of her experience is quite broad, always connected with brands. So I will let you know when I post that in our shell for you to watch. So in preparation for the show, yes, Fisker is the orange-handled scissor. In preparation for our to watch the video interview, I've also loaded into our Blackboard shell 5 videos about the company, about the different brands, and some sort of sizzle reels that you also might find interesting as a background should you have an interest in doing public relations, specifically for the home, inside and outside the home. So, assignment 1, becoming a pioneer publicist presentation submissions are due, so hopefully you've done that. So let's continue to talk about environmental issues, influences on your audience beliefs and behavior. We've been talking a lot about knowing your audience and how hard it is to know your audience. Here's an image you all probably know quite well. We're all born naked and the rest is drag, from RuPaul's Drag Race. Think about how that concept has changed so much within your lifetime. If you talk to your parents about drag and you talk to your grandparents about drag, this show, this concept, this kind of global phenomenon would have never happened to the scale that it happened in your lifetime. What does that mean about society? So what is diversity? In our shell, I've put in some of these kind of classic at this point ads about racism, diversity, and inclusion. The first being a company I actually like a lot, Dove. And you'll see when you watch this ad, and I'd be curious what your thoughts are about it. Another brand I highly respect, Audi. This is a brand from Japan. A commercial from Japan, and it's misogynist. It's sexist. It illustrates the differing points of view between a man and a woman in society, and especially in Japanese society. So, in other words, why we do what we do. Diversity is that. It's diversity in mindset, it's diversity in ethnicity, it's diversity in life experience. It's so many things, and we are so different than each other in so many ways, and we are so similar to each other in so many ways. As we look at people who have looked at diversity and inclusion in a really good way, in a way that we hope more and more brands will learn from and articulate this sense of inclusion and diversity, is this Sunsilk ad, which is actually a global award winner. It won the Gold Lion at Cannes. That's in our shell for you to watch. It's really a perfect communication vehicle for a very, very sensitive subject, and heightened by the country in which the advertisement was created. So let's look at some of the changing. Why is this world changing so much when we look at diversity? Well, we look at extremes. We look at something like the Fluid Project, the first non-gender retail experience. We look at the success of RuPaul, RuPaul being on the cover of Cosmopolitan magazine for the first time, a magazine solely geared to straight white women. um, cis females. And we look at the camp show that was recently held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York, one of the world's great art institutions. And this was their show. This was their message. And for those of you that experienced it, I'm sure you agree, it was really an amazing show. It tracked the 100-year journey of how we look at this idea of gender, blurring genders, blurring roles, rights and privileges. So let's look at the broader scope of environmental influences on consumer behavior, because again, we want to understand our audience. So there's culture, there's subcultures, there's social classes, there's reference groups, there's situational determinants. So I ask you, what influences you? What influences your friends? What else could influence your audience? Other great examples of how a brand has tapped into a global consciousness is what happened in 1971 and the brand Coca-Cola. I put this advertisement into our shell for you to watch. It's one of the most talked about marketing examples of the last 100 years as one of the best of the last 100 years. It reflected society's changes. It reflected a whole generation's point of view. And this is before the internet. So this is about, again, much like our pioneers, not actually seeing each other, but starting to travel the globe a little more, right? And how the brand, which stands for, many things, but stands for happiness, is bringing unity and happiness and inclusion. And, unfortunately, then this happened in 2017. So many years later, but a similar time of upheaval, a similar time of societal separation, a similar time of, fights and battles between people who act differently, look differently, think differently, all changing your audience. This was Pepsi. And so I put this ad in our shell as well for you to watch. It's when you watch the Coca-Cola ad and then you watch the Pepsi ad, you have to ask yourself, how could, what has happened in the world since 1971 when Coke did their ad, and how could Pepsi have misread their audience so poorly? So I want to now introduce, based on our discussion of diversity and inclusion, your next discussion forum, due week 8, taking a closer look at context, and in this case, context is your audience. So let's look today at radio, television, and online video. Lots of objectives, so let's go. We want to recognize the broad penetration of broadcasting, recognize the power of radio, describe the formats for radio news releases, report 5 approaches to getting news on local television, describe the format and production of video content, describe how to conduct a satellite media tour, examine other placement opportunities, and review the salient features of owned media and online video. So, recognizing the broad penetration of broadcasting. This is your next discussion forum, due week 6. The Future of Broadcasting Discussion Forum. The reach of broad media and online video. We look at radio, television, and online video. In fact, and you'll see this in your discussion forum, a YouTube fun fact. So 300 hours of videos are added daily to YouTube. 5 billion are watched daily. There is no printed vehicle or news channel that has this kind of following and this kind of outreach to such a broad audience. So we want to recognize the power of radio and the formats for radio news releases and public service announcements. So radio, it may not be the so in fashion, but it depends on where you are located in the world. It may not be your particular choice of how to receive information or news or touch an audience, but it's relevant to a lot of people who spend a lot of time in their cars. It's relevant to a lot of people who have curated their radio programming. It's very cost effective. So a radio news release is slightly different. Again, your textbook will go into a little more details about that than the printed. It's the world of spoken journalism, which is really quite interesting. So when you think about the people who are successful in this medium, where I can't see your face, but I hear your storytelling skills, these are people to really watch and listen to and try to learn from. Audio news releases, there's two forms. You can hire a person to record using sound bites. You can use audio, in creating an audio news release. It's really, it's very cost effective. It can be used in a wide variety of subjects and in a wide variety of context. It also has a very unique format. Radio public service announcements, again, depending on who your client is or what brand you work with, this is also something where you can start to build relationships with news channels based on sort of the content of the story you're telling. So this is about for the better of public interest. This is about community issues. This is about issues about children, safety, health, environmental. It can be, as produced as you want it to be, but the message is slightly different, and you'll find that your news channels also respond quite differently to it. Radio media tours, also very interesting. My friend again, Cardi B. Again, radio may not be your thing, and especially not if you're in New York City, it may not be your go-to. But for many parts of the world and many parts of our country, radio is key because people travel in their cars or they have a lot of downtime where video is not possible, where they just listen. They're not able to actually watch. Radio promotions are also a great way to connect to your audience. If you learn that your audience is specific to the radio network. So let's look at 5 approaches to getting news on local television. Again, we keep talking about this big global vision I want you to have, but also it's super important to understand that you're talking to one person at a time. Even though you're talking to 100 people, one person is listening and they're saying, what's in it for me? Remember that from weeks ago. How is this going to make my life better? Why is this interesting or important to me? So you want to look at things that appeal to, now we're talking about television, for example. You want to have images that really appeal and influence and move people and connect to people. You want it to be an idea that sort of solidifies and brings communities together. Your text calls the next section the new normal B-roll packaging. And what that basically means is you have your basic visual audio package, your news release or your content for your storytelling. But to come to that content, it's probably way edited down. It's edited down to 2 minutes, it's edited down to 10 minutes, whatever it is. You probably have a lot of additional imagery and visuals. And so having that made available to your news channels could be very important to them. If they find, your release quite interesting, you want to be able to say to them, and here are links for additional references, for additional unnarrated videos, for additional special, looks at whatever topic I'm talking about. It could be really key, and also thinking about time, remove some of the delays you might have in going out and filming some more. Video public service announcements. Again, whenever you're talking about a service announcement, it's a different relationship. It's an unpaid announcement. It promotes government programs. It serves the public interest. You're going to have a much different relationship with your news channels if that happens to be your client, or if that happens to be your company, or that you happen to become, a publicist who perhaps in your portfolio has many clients that are, similar to this idea. This is about supporting the harmfulness of tobacco. But if you're a publicist and you start to build your legacy, that you are all about public interest stories, you will also become unique and become, a go-to for your news channels who are looking for a balance in, both the sensational news, the sort of meaty news, and also the news that really immediately makes a difference to society, to their audience. Satellite media tours, hugely important. We touched on this a little bit last week in terms of the book tours. Very important. It's, thanks to technology, we don't have to be in the same place at the same time. They're very, cost efficient. We've all experienced this in our own ways over the last 2.5 semesters. For many of us who were teaching face-to-face, all of a sudden, because of the pandemic, we had to teach remote. Very similar in concept. It can be, scripted, staged, produced. It's very, very, very effective. It also allows, someone in this part of the world to promote their product or service to that part of the world. And again, you're providing content to, in this case, it's San Diego Living. You're providing content that otherwise maybe they couldn't afford or they've never heard of. And this is really, really key. Placement opportunities in broadcasting. Let's talk a little bit about that. Talk shows. So, again, you're in school, we're in school. We're not sitting around watching talk shows, and that might not even be a thing that is interesting to you or your friends. But it may have been interesting to your parents. It was definitely interesting to your grandparents. Because, not so much about being in the talk show, but because the internet didn't exist. It was, television was the way we told stories and spread the news. My image here is of Bette Midler and Johnny Carson. Now, you may have never watched a Johnny Carson show, but he had a talk show many years ago. His average viewer, and he was on every night, was 6.5 million. When he did his final show, and he invited someone of the caliber, the star sort of caliber of Bette Midler, he had 80 million people watch. So again, understanding the cadence of outreach, you may be looking at a talk show that normally doesn't get very many people. 6.5 million is not a lot of people. I mean, it's fine. It's just not a lot of people, right? Especially not in the world of technology where one tweet, 1 million people can view it, right? But if you start to build relationships with these kind of news channels, with television, you can also start to look at not only, potentially booking your client as a guest, depending on the format, but you can give them notice. You can be part of maybe something in their future. Interviews, these talk show interviews, what were so attractive about talk shows is they were questions that you wanted to ask the celebrity yourself, or they were very interruptive questions that would help your celebrity appear in a slightly different way to your audience. So again, it may not be on your radar, but understand that it is still a way that the world communicates and gathers their news. Magazine shows became super popular at the end of the last century. They continue to be popular, not maybe as popular, just because we have so much variety and we're able to stream so many different things. But the idea was, we went from a society that would be okay with an article or a feature news story in a printed publication to the news story in a digital format, perhaps with video, to a television series. So for 20 minutes of recorded information, you could actually experience your story in a much more real-time live way. I put this next clip in our shell. It was a movie from a couple of years ago called The Greatest Story Ever Sold. And you can see by all the call-outs, the premise of this movie was, we've all seen movies that have had brands sort of placed into the movie. Like you'll see the bad guy drive up, and all of a sudden the camera lands on the Mercedes-Benz logo. Well, Mercedes-Benz is a partner, is a contributor, right? They're advertising in your movie without advertising, creating an ad per se. This really took that and pushed it to a very comical place, although it's a documentary. So when we look at product placement, here's the example of the Justice League and Mercedes. You see the logo, you see the special car. It's forefront. It's a character almost in the movie. Like you can't look away from it, right? So if you're in a popular movie or a very successful movie that makes $1 billion worldwide and billions of people see it, you have this placement, this 2-hour-long commercial. So it's product placement. You can look smaller. You can look at TV. You can look at film. Depending on how the consumer holds your brand's value, you might be this might be a great route for you in terms of starting the dialogue of your brand in a different venue. The key features of owned media and online video in raising brand visibility. So online video is just, it's sort of taken over the world, right? You see, whether you love them or hate them, Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star when they did their partnership. But no one really does it like Jeffree, and it's all about timing. It's all about where society is. In online videos, you control the content a bit more. There's a big responsibility to generate a lot of content because we are used to these channels, these people that post video. We're used to a lot of content changing every second. The stories have to be interesting. It has to be branded. It has to be compelling. It has to be real, genuine, make people laugh or make people, in shock. Original and short sound bites again. This isn't about tapping into a 2-hour-long moment. This is about a provocative 3 minutes, a provocative 2 minutes that really makes you rethink the story that's being told. It's a great vehicle, and again, like I said, few do online videos as well as Jeffree Star. So, and I don't mean about the man, Jeffree Star. This isn't a commentary on, what he does or doesn't do in his business or private life. This is just about, how you continue to tell a story of a brand that you've created, and you've continued to make this relationship. And he has pretty much a love-hate relationship with his audience, where you continue to tell stories. Your audience continues to experience your thoughts. And again, it's of a brand. It's not of the man. So, when there's a moment of the man telling us stories, he lets us know it's a very different moment, right? When something, when there's a news event. But, you want to think about, when you think about your brand, you think about creating a news story for your brand, you might want to think about, how would you create or produce video content? How would you do it? Have you ever made a TikTok video? Have you ever done a podcast? Maybe this is the time to try it out for Project 2. Definitely for Project 3. Again, if you have any questions about what we talked about today, please talk to your teammates first. If you still have more questions, please let me know. And remember to read your text and do your weekly quizzes. Everything is outlined in our syllabus. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week.